The journey to Red Brick Manor felt like a dive into an unsettling dream. My headlights cut through the thick fog, barely revealing the gnarled trees that loomed over the lonely road. An hour later, Siri announced our arrival. The manor loomed atop a hill, surrounded by other equally eerie structures. The neighborhood, built in the 18th century, came out like a gothic nightmare. As a debt-ridden college student desperate for cash, I was accustomed to strange and affluent environments. I parked my battered Honda A block outside the Cooper estate. The Coopers were old money and required my assistance babysitting their 10-year-old daughter tonight. Her nanny had an emergency, Mrs. Cooper had said on the phone. The gig paid triple my usual rate, so I didn't hesitate when Mrs. Cooper mentioned that Bridget loved her dolls and they shouldn't be parted from her. The iron gate with its snarling griffin was the first sign that this place differed. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of dried roses. A pale, rail-thin woman greeted me on the porch.
Hi, I'm Mrs. Cooper.
Her smile was tight.
Bridget's upstairs, in the living room.
She continued, her gaze avoiding mine.
I've left the schedule and instructions on the table. She gets upset easily.
The chauffeur gave me a particular look over Mrs. Cooper's shoulder. The nursery was at the end of a dimly lit hallway. Bridget, a delicate girl with wide, haunted eyes, sat on the floor clutching a porcelain doll.
Hi, Bridget. I'm Ale,
I said with a shaky smile. Silence. The hours afterward dragged into an eerie quiet. I tried everything to break the monotony, reading stories, building a pillow fort, but Bridget remained statue still, except for the odd rocking. Around 10, Bridget finally spoke.
I'm sleepy.
All right. Let's take you to your room.
The moment I stepped into Bridget's room, I was stunned. I'd never seen so many dolls stacked in a kid's room. They all had porcelain faces and shiny hair. The doll's hair looked strikingly realistic.
Wow. You sure love dolls, huh?
Yeah. They are my slaves.
I wasn't expecting a little girl to use a word like that, but I realized something was very wrong with Bridget. Maybe she's not getting the right kind of upbringing from her parents and turned into a spoiled brat. But I'm only here for a night, so who cares? As I tucked her into bed, my eyes went to her tiny hands. They looked rough and calloused. She blinked at me, flashing her creepy smile, and then went to sleep. Around 2 a.m., I passed out on the couch while watching a movie when I heard a glass break. A rustling wind from the open window had knocked down the vase from the pedestal. I rubbed my eyes to get a good look when noticed Bridget standing behind me. Her wrinkled face was contorted into a grotesque mask of rage as she continued stroking her doll.
I like your eyes. I'd have them.
Before I could react, she lunged at me. I stumbled backward and we both landed on the floor.
Get off me! Get off me!
I want your eyes!
I tried my best to free myself from her grasp, but damn, she was so strong. Too strong to be a child. She ripped a thick bunch of hair from my skull and smelt it while laughing like a maniac. I pushed her with all my strength and ran down the corridor. I looked over my shoulder and saw her standing at the end of the passage. Her childlike face changed into sheer evil. Adrenaline surged as I countered Bridget's attack by throwing a showpiece I found on a nearby tabletop. She tried to dodge, but the corner of it hit her on the forehead, making her scream in pain. Bridget turned to me, her eyes cold and calculating, and I bolted as fast as I could until I reached the main road. Flagging down a passing car, I breathlessly explained what had happened. The driver helped me get to the nearby police station. When I went back to the manor, I was accompanied by a squad of cops. A scary revelation surfaced once the cops searched the property. It turned out that Bridget wasn't a little girl, but a dwarf woman who was Mrs. Cooper's deformed sister. Driven by deep-seated insecurity and a history of being bullied, Bridget had killed the previous babysitters in their sleep, cutting their hair to add to her grotesque doll collection. The dolls, with their eerie resemblance to real people, were seized, and in the backyard they discovered a shallow grave containing 7 bodies of women similar to my age. Mrs. Cooper, ever the loving sister, had been burying the bodies in the backyard to cover up Bridget's atrocities. The sisters were charged with multiple counts of murder, and the manor was sealed off. The chauffeur fled the scene, but the cops suspected he too helped these psycho sisters in their gruesome murders. Since then, I have sworn to never go babysitting, no matter how much the gig is paying me. I'd never seen anything quite like her. It was a Tuesday night, a dead shift at Dunkin Donuts, and I was stuck closing up. My name is Melania, and I had worked at that place for 2 years. The hours were long, the pay was crap, but it was a job. That night, the usual routine of working like a zombie took a turn because of a strange woman. She sat in the corner booth alone, a strange-looking woman wrapped in a scarf, wearing sunglasses despite the late hour. It was nearly midnight, and she had been there for hours, ordering large Coke after large Coke, 11 in total. Who drinks that much soda? There was a basket which she had placed on the table, covered completely with small holes to the side. Something about her felt off as the hours passed. I approached her cautiously, my nerves on edge.
Ma'am, we're closing soon.
She looked up, her face hidden behind those dark glasses, and said,
I will be dead when the clock strikes 12. But first, I need to tell you 3 secrets.
Are you okay? Do you need help?
She ignored my questions, instead continuing, her voice a flat monotone.
Tonight, I seduced and murdered a congressman.
My breath caught in my throat.
What are you talking about?
She leaned in closer, her presence almost suffocating.
Congressman Harold Green. I approached him at the hotel bar, charmed him with lies and promises. He never suspected a thing. We went up to his room, and while he poured us drinks, I injected him with a poison derived from a plant native to my homeland. It was painless. He didn't even see it coming.
I felt a chill run down my spine. She smiled, a cruel twist of her lips visible beneath the scarf.
I had to do it. He was too close, bringing in a policy which would upset the status quo between my people and yours. We couldn't allow that.
Your people?
I echoed in disbelief. She removed her sunglasses, revealing eyes that were not human, large, black, and reflective.
As you can see, I am not lying. My race has been cooperating with your government for decades. We share knowledge, technology, and get some things in return. But Green was going to do something. He had to be stopped.
I stepped back, my legs trembling.
This is insane. You're crazy.
She stood up, towering over me, and I realized just how small I was compared to her.
Believe what you will, but know this. There are more like me, watching, waiting.
She looked at the clock on the wall, ticking towards midnight, then turned to me with those otherworldly eyes, and for the first time I saw something almost like regret.
The 3rd secret.
She began, but a strange sound cut her off, a low humming vibration that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. She froze, her body stiffening like a statue. I reached out, my hand shaking, and touched her arm. She was cold, unresponsive. Then, without warning, she turned and walked out of the diner, her movements almost robotic. I saw her get out and turn to the empty alley behind the diner, but suddenly, a bright flash of light came out of nowhere and blinded me. I rushed out and ran to the back of the alley, but she was gone, vanished without a trace. I returned to the diner, my heart pounding. Her basket was still there. I knew I shouldn't, but I had to look. Carefully, I approached it and lifted the cover. Inside were strange, translucent eggs, pulsing with an eerie glow.
This is what lack of sleep does.
I reminded myself, wondering if I was just tired and imagining things that weren't there. Just then, the TV mounted in the corner of the diner flickered to life. A breaking news report cutting through the static. The anchor's voice was grim. Congressman Harold Green has been found dead in his hotel room. At the moment, it appears that he suffered a stroke while taking a bath. Authorities do not suspect any foul play. I left the basket, my hands shaking uncontrollably. This couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of sick joke, a nightmare. But the evidence was there, right in front of me. Those eggs, the news report, her chilling confession. I went home that night, but sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, those black, strange, soulless eyes staring into mine. I heard her voice, her final words echoing in my mind.
There are more like me, watching, waiting.
Owning a KFC franchise wasn't exactly what I dreamed of. Still, after years of scrimping and saving, it was a stepping stone, a sign of stability for my young family. The grand opening was a hit. The Colonel's secret recipe filled the air, families poured in, and the registers sang a sweet song of cha-ching. I got lost in the chaos, wearing my long hours like a badge of honor in this new venture. Even though I could easily appoint someone to close up after every day shift, I still chose to do it independently. So, this one late evening as I was locking up, I noticed a shadow moving outside the kitchen windows. As I brought my face close to the window to see if someone was there, a man jumped right away from the darkness, almost giving me a heart attack. He had scruffy hair framed by wild eyes, and he stared into my soul. A shiver ran down my spine, but I brushed it off once he left abruptly. Probably some homeless junkie, I thought. Over the next few weeks, the man became a fixture, standing silently across the street. My wife, Carmel, dismissed him as harmless, but I couldn't shake a feeling of unease.
He probably wants some free food. You're worrying for no reason.
Carmel scoffed. Then came the night that shattered my calm. As I was leaving the restaurant, a rustle in the alley sent chills down my spine. I turned around to see the man standing behind me with a creepy smile, splitting his grime-caked face. Fear, primal and cold, coiled in my stomach. He spoke in a raspy voice, the words sending a jolt through me. "Just the bones. I only need the bones." I rushed to my car and drove away, leaving him standing there in the dark. He didn't follow me or chase me, though. Days later, reviewing the security footage, I noticed something unsettling. The man wasn't digging through the regular trash. He was specifically targeting the bin where we disposed of leftover chicken bones. That's when a cold dread filled me. Every night, I started locking the dumpster with a heavy-duty padlock. This change in routine seemed to anger the man. The next morning, I found the padlock damaged like someone had beaten the crap out of it with a stone. The dumpster was ransacked, and again, the chicken bones were gone. Panic gnawed at me. What was he using them for? Was he selling them on some bizarre black market? Furious and determined to stop him, I decided to take matters into my own hands. We had a small incinerator on site for disposing of expired packaging. The following night, after closing time, I shoved a bag full of leftover bones into the incinerator and lit it up. A triumphant smirk played on my lips, thinking I'd finally put an end to this charade. But the next morning, my KFC was in a complete mess. The back door of the restaurant was smashed in, the deep fryer overturned, with grease splattered everywhere. On the wall, in a thick red substance, possibly oil or even blood, were these chilling words. "You can't stop the offering." I called the cops and headed to the kitchen to clean up the place. As I stepped in, a dark figure loomed in the doorway. It was Edgar. Before I could react, he lunged, a guttural roar escaping his lips. We grappled in the dimly lit kitchen, the smell of burning oil and fear thick in the air. He was surprisingly strong, fueled by whatever madness drove him. In the struggle, he knocked over a metal tray, sending sizzling cooking oil flying. I felt a searing pain in my arm as the hot oil made contact. He grabbed me by the neck, but I too landed flying kicks and punches at random speed. Just as I thought I might be overpowered, the screech of sirens pierced the night. With a burst of adrenaline, I shoved him back, and right then the cops got in. The aftermath was a blur. The officers secured the scene, calling for medical attention for my burns. Edgar, cornered in the alley, offered no resistance. The police report documented the vandalism, assault, and his history, leaving no doubt Edgar would face serious charges. The most unsettling part of the entire ordeal was Edgar's crazed shouts during the struggle. Between blows, he'd scream about the offering, about how I was ruining everything.
You can't stop it. I need the bones. They grant immortality. You're ruining everything.
His words echoed in my head, a chilling reminder of the depths of his delusion. But even if I didn't understand his motives, at least they were rooted in a twisted reality, not the supernatural. Shaken, but alive, I sat in the ambulance, the throbbing pain in my arm a stark reminder of the night's events. The once mundane task of taking out the trash was now laced with a new kind of fear, but it was a fear I could handle. This wasn't a haunting or a curse. It was a man driven by madness. Edgar was finally off the streets and undergoing a psychiatric evaluation. As for me, I hope I never, ever meet Edgar again. I always loved the quiet of the night shift at Dunkin Donuts. The place transformed after midnight, the usual hustle and bustle giving way to a serene calm. At 42, I appreciated these peaceful hours. It gave me time to think, to unwind. So when weird customers dropped unannounced amidst my break, I used to get really pissed. And this one time, I got really pissed, which kind of backfired on me. I was about to close the place when the bell above the door jingled. I looked up to see a gaunt, disheveled man enter. His clothes hung loosely on his thin frame, and his eyes darted around the shop with a nervous energy. He approached the counter, his lips twitching into an uneasy smile. From that very moment, I got creeps. "Welcome to Dunkin Donuts. What do you want?" I was so tired that I didn't even try to sound nice. The man stared at me blankly for a minute straight ahead, then asked, "What should I have?" It sounded so idiotic that I lost it. "Decide for yourself? I'm not your dad," I answered rudely. His left twitched with that reply, and then finally he asked for a coffee and a plain donut. As I prepared the order, I could feel his eyes boring into my back. It was unsettling, but I brushed it off, attributing it to the late hour and the stranger's odd demeanor. I placed the coffee and donut on the counter. "Here you go," I said, offering a nod. He grabbed the items without a word and shuffled towards the seating area. As I turned back to the counter, I heard a noise behind me, a strange shuffling sound. I spun around and my heart nearly stopped. The man was on all fours, sitting like a dog with a maniac grin plastered across his face. "I didn't kill him," the man wailed, his voice echoing through the empty shop. "I didn't." My blood ran cold as the man produced a knife from his coat pocket, waving it erratically. I scrambled to the back of the shop, my mind racing. The man began to crawl, dragging himself forward with a terrifying determination. I bolted out the back door, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I glanced over my shoulder and saw the man still crawling, the knife glinting in the dim light. I ran to my car, fumbling for my keys. I managed to get inside and lock the doors just as he reached the vehicle. He slammed his head against the car's windows, the knife clunking against the glass. "I didn't kill him!" he screamed, his eyes wild with desperation. My hands shook as I tried to start the car, but it wouldn't turn over. The fuel gauge read empty, just my rotten luck. Panic surged through me. I reached for my phone and dialed 911, my fingers trembling.
There's a man with a knife trying to kill me,
I gasped.
I'm at Dunkin Donuts, 324 Main Street. Please, hurry.
I dropped the phone and slumped back into my seat, watching in horror as the man continued to assault the car. The knife scratched the glass, the sound grating on my nerves.
I didn't kill him,
the man kept repeating, his voice growing more frantic. My vision blurred, and the world started to spin. The last thing I saw before I blacked out was his crazed eyes staring into mine. When I returned to my senses, I was surrounded by a flashing lights of police cars. Officers were milling around and paramedics were checking my vitals. I sat up, my head pounding, and looking around. The creepy man was in handcuffs, being led away by 2 officers. He was still muttering,
I didn't kill him.
A detective approached me. "Are you okay?" he asked, with concern in his voice. I nodded, still trying to process what had happened. "What's wrong with him? Who is he?" I managed to ask. "His name is Andrew Smith. He has a history of severe mental illness. We did some digging and found out he had a traumatic past." I listened as the detective recounted Andrew's story. When Andrew was 10, he had a younger brother who was just 2 years old. One day, Andrew took his brother out to play, and a car hit the little boy, killing him instantly. The accident left Andrew shattered. His father blamed him for the tragedy, subjecting him to years of abuse and neglect before abandoning him altogether. Since then, Andrew had been in and out of psychiatric facilities, haunted by the memory of his brother's death. "He's reliving the trauma," the detective explained. "He didn't kill his brother, but in his mind, he's been trying to atone for it ever since. Tonight, he snapped." I shuddered, the horror of the night settling over me. I glanced over at Andrew, sitting in the back of a police car, rocking back and forth. "Will he get help?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The detective nodded. "We'll make sure he does. He's not evil, just broken." As the paramedics helped me to my feet, I couldn't stop but feel bad for Andrew. The daunting realization that me being rude to Andrew by mentioning his dad must have triggered his old traumas, hence he reacted the way he did. I hope Andrew's getting the help he needs. The night shift at Dunkin Donuts would never feel the same, but I request everyone watching this, please be nice to strangers because you might not know what storms that person's fighting inside. I was just looking for a quick snack run that night. The exams were killing me, and I needed a short break, so I went to the nearby convenience store. The fluorescent lights flickered slightly as I walked down the aisles, my cart rattling with the basics: instant noodles, a few energy drinks, and gums. I turned into the chips aisle, scanning for my favorite, Pringles. That's when I saw the crazy girl. She stood there, disheveled and jittery, her hair a tangled mess, wearing a skimpy, worn-out one-piece. Her eyes were wide, almost manic, darting around from left to right. She was muttering to herself, a strange, repetitive chant.
Gotta get some Pringles. Gotta get some Pringles. Gotta get some Pringles.
She said it over and over, her voice rising and falling in pitch, sometimes whispering, sometimes nearly shouting. I tried to ignore her, but it was hard not to feel uneasy. Her presence was unsettling, a sense of crazy shooting from her. I cautiously reached for a can of Pringles, thinking maybe it would calm her down if she saw that I wasn't interested in taking all of them. As soon as my fingers wrapped around the can, her eyes locked onto mine. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Her chant stopped abruptly, and silence filled the aisle. Seconds passed, and then dread set in when I realized that she wasn't even blinking. Then, she lunged at me, her hands clawing at my face. I stumbled back, the Pringles can flew from my hands. She screeched, a sound that was more animal than human, and then dug her nails across my cheek, drawing blood. I don't know what had happened, but I was just paralyzed by her sudden outburst. I grabbed a nearby shelf, trying to steady myself, but she was relentless. "What the hell? Get off me!" I tried to push her away, but she was stronger than she looked. She grabbed a bag of chips and swung it at my head. The bag burst open, chips flying everywhere, but she didn't stop and started throwing more. She grabbed another and another, pummeling me with each one. I was still confused as what to do. The aisle was deserted as well, so there was no one around. In a desperate attempt to defend myself, I grabbed a jar of salsa from the shelf and smashed it against her hands. She screamed in pain, but she didn't back down. She picked up a metal shelf bracket that had fallen loose and swung it at me. I felt a sharp pain in my arm as it connected, and I knew I was bleeding. "Help! Someone help!" I backed up against the shelves, looking for anything I could use to defend myself. My hand found a can of soup, and I hurled it at her. It hit her square in the chest, knocking her back just enough for me to make a run for it. I stumbled down the aisle, my vision blurry, blood dripping from my arm and face. I could hear her behind me, her footsteps erratic, her voice a high-pitched wail.
Gotta get some Pringles!
I turned a corner, nearly slipping on the tiled floor. Ahead of me, I saw the store security guard rushing towards us, his face a mix of confusion and determination. He tackled her just as she was about to reach me, bringing her down to the floor. She fought him, screaming and thrashing, but he managed to pin her down. "It's okay, I got her." Two store boys also came running in and helped in pinning the woman down. She screamed at the top of her lungs, shaking her body and tossing all over the floor. I collapsed against a shelf, my breath coming in ragged gasps. My entire body ached, and I could feel the warm trickle of blood down my face and arm. Other shoppers had gathered, their eyes wide with shock. The police arrived quickly and paramedics soon followed. They took her away in cuffs while she still screamed the same thing.
Gotta get some Pringles!
As they patched me up, I could hear the murmurs around me, people speculating about who she was and why she'd attacked me. I don't understand. She just snapped. The next morning, it was all over the news. They described her as a local drug addict with a history of mental illness. She was apparently under the influence and hadn't eaten in 3 days. In her high, she had entered the store and got lost between the aisles, just remembering to eat Pringles. Gotta tell you the truth, lots of crazies around in the world right now. In the heart of New York City, overshadowing Trump Tower, for years now, there has been whispers of a conspiracy theory swirling around the golden facade, but none so strange and gripping as those involving the rumor about a hidden room that supposedly contains secrets capable of altering the course of history. As an investigative reporter, I have always considered these theories to be nothing more than piles of steaming crap. And then I received an anonymous tip about a hidden elevator that leads to an unknown floor in Trump Tower. The source said the secret floor had papers and recordings that could unravel a world conspiracy. Skeptical yet intrigued, I decided to pursue the lead. My investigation commenced with the blueprints of the building, but there was not the slightest indication of any hidden floor or secret elevator. I was undaunted and frustrated simultaneously. I kept digging, interviewing former employees, security personnel, and even tower residents, most of whom dismissed the question with a laugh and an incredulous look, except for one old janitor, Hank. His eyes went as wide as saucers with terror when I brought up the hidden floor.
"You don't want to go poking around in things best left alone,"
Hank warned, his voice shaking.
"Some doors, once opened, can't be closed."
I, however, didn't stop to heed the grim warning. One late night, checking out the building's service elevator layout, something caught my attention. An elevator shaft that seemed to continue past the floor on the building's official directory. My heart was pounding as I approached it. With half charm and a fake ID, I managed to slip my way into the service areas of Trump Tower. Dimly lit corridors led me to the mysterious elevator. Old, made of brass buttons with years of wear and tear. There was one additional button at the top, labeled only with an enigmatic symbol. Preparing myself and holding my breath, I pressed it, and the elevator began to ascend. The ride felt like it was an eternity. The air inside was crackling, almost heavy with anticipation. Finally, the doors opened, and I set foot inside a lavishly decorated room, just like it had been preserved from another time. Everything exhaled gold and precious paintings. All the ostentation staggered me. What really took my attention was the large desk in the center of the room, made out of mahogany. On the desk lay a series of documents and a laptop with it. It is here where documents unraveled a complicated web of political maneuvering, money transactions, and secret meetings among world players. But what really got me spooked was that over and over again, there were references to Project Golden Dawn, a world-class operation with the best politicians, billionaires, and even heads of state in the manipulation of world events for their benefit. The noise made me freeze. As my eyes scanned over the documents, I turned slowly to see that some figure was emerging from the shadows. The figure was none other than Donald Trump himself, not looking surprised, but amused.
"Welcome, George,"
he said, his voice dripping with confidence.
"I see you found my little secret."
How did he know I would be here? Why had he let me get this far? Trump indicated towards a chair and invited me to sit.
"You see, every great empire has its mysteries,"
he began as he leaned against the desk.
"This room, these papers, it's a game. It's a game of power, control, and influence. Not towards me, but towards a network, a global order that runs the world as we know it."
A chill ran down my spine. Everything started to get serious. Why are you telling me all this? I asked, my voice steady despite my fear. Trump smiled.
"For I know something about you. You're no ordinary journalist. You're of that type that feeds on the truth, no matter how dangerous it is. And I need somebody like you."
No sooner had it stopped than the sound of accompanying footsteps filled the room just seconds afterward. Several men in black suits entered, their faces all rigid. Trump smiled a bit off to nod at them.
"You have a choice, okay?"
he said.
"Join me and you'll have access to truths beyond your wildest dreams, or walk away now and this never happened. But remember, the world isn't as it seems, and sometimes knowing too much can be hazardous."
I was hustled out of the tower by the men in suits. They held on to me insistently, but it could not be called rough. As soon as we came outside and my head started spinning from the huge crowd in New York City, something started settling. I had stumbled across something way larger than any old conspiracy theory. This was a revelation, enough to either make or break my career, or life. What would my next move be? The papers I possessed, snapshots of proof positive to the conspiracy. Still, the exposure would lead to a catastrophe. Still, the lure of the truth was irresistible. I looked at my laptop, and the files glared back at me. There was something queer among them. The files existed there with a title, Project Springfield. Opening it, I noticed that within it was references to a popular television series, The Simpsons, and how the show predicted the Trump presidency. Now, that could be a part of the conspiracy, couldn't it? I continued my research and found that the authors of The Simpsons also belonged to the same global network from which Trump originated, but in a very subtle contribution that made this show. In fact, predictions of what would happen were not just coincidences, but the placement of a message and a way to prepare society's subconsciousness and manipulate public opinion. I was chilled to the bone. The documents were alleging that Matt Groening, the creator of The Simpsons, was related to several powerful figures in politics and finance. The show was actually a device with which the public was set up and prepared for events that hadn't even happened yet. Adding one more layer of mystery to my thought, the show seemed to have truly predicted some incidents. In one, Bart Simpson had a sign, a makeshift President Trump sign, in the broadcast years before Trump had even announced his candidacy. Another showed the scene eerily similar to when Trump went down the golden escalator to announce his run for the presidency. It's as if it was some sort of prophecy on that show, real life coming through in its futuristic dates with uncanny accuracy. I remember one late night while going through the documents, receiving a call from an untraceable number. The voice on the other side was distorted and simply said, "Stop your digging, otherwise you'll have to pay for this." It was a real threat, but I became even more determined then. The truth had to be too important to bury. It all came together when I found a reference to an upcoming event dubbed the Springfield Protocol, expected to coincide with a major political upset. If The Simpsons had it right, if its creators had any inkling of what was really happening, the implications were chilling. The world was being manipulated in ways we couldn't even begin to fathom. As I placed the final full stop in the last paragraph of the article, I already knew it was a big risk. But the world had to know the truth. The enigma of the Golden Tower, the sinister influence behind The Simpsons, the chilling reality of Project Golden Dawn. The world had to know. My life might never be the same, but I was ready. The future depended on it. The buzz in my pocket was a constant companion, a comforting thrum against my thigh. Texts, emails, the occasional breaking news notification. My phone was the umbilical cord connecting me to the digital world. It held my entire life. Contacts, photos, work files, even that embarrassing karaoke video from college I swore I'd delete, but spoiler alert, I hadn't. So when the familiar weight vanished from my pocket on that rainy Tuesday afternoon, panic clawed its way up my throat. My first thought was absent-mindedness. Maybe I'd left it at the coffee shop while getting my usual latte. But as I retraced my steps, a cold dread coiled in my gut. The bustling train ride, the long meeting, my phone had vanished. I thought I'll get a new phone tomorrow, but something far more sinister was waiting for me in the morning. I found a single sheet of paper on my doorstep. Did someone leave it last night? As I gave it a read, I got chills down my spine. Inside it, only 2 lines resided. The first one was a familiar phrase that I once casually mentioned to a friend in a conversation the day before I lost my phone. Salmon teriyaki for lunch, extra seaweed. Below it, scrawled in bold red, were the words, "Your phone knows everything, and now so do I." Fear clung to my chest. What the hell? Some creepy stranger has my phone. From that day onwards, I started getting these anonymous emails. Every single one of them served a punch to my gut. Sometimes it was details about a childhood crush I'd confided in years ago, the name of my first pet, the embarrassing karaoke song incident, and the list goes on. It was like the thief was living my life, holding my secrets hostage. I couldn't go to the police. How do you explain someone stealing your data and using it to stalk you? All I could do was get a new phone and inform all my friends and family about this incident. Still, the threatening emails didn't leave me be. It was then I reached out to Leo, my tech-savvy friend and resident computer wizard. Leo, a walking encyclopedia of tech hacks and troubleshooting, understood my predicament immediately. "They've accessed your data, man," he confirmed, his voice tight with concern. "But there's a chance we can track them." "Then do it, dude. I want to know who this MF making my life miserable." Days turned into a blur of frantic searches and sleepless nights. Leo, fueled by gallons of coffee and righteous fury, worked tirelessly. He used a combination of forensic software and what he called ethical social engineering to trace the digital footprints of the stolen data. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he found a lead. A ping from a dilapidated apartment building located on the outskirts. The building reeked of neglect, the air thick with a sense of despair and loneliness. Leo's tracking device showed us that whoever had my phone was living in the last apartment on the 2nd floor of this building. With a pounding heart, we stopped right outside the specific apartment and knocked on the door. A few minutes later, a gaunt man answered the door, his eyes wide and bloodshot. Before he could speak, I blurted, "That's my phone! You stole it!" Surprise flickered across his face, quickly replaced by a sneer. "Don't be ridiculous," he scoffed. I don't know you.
Get lost.
The man then tried to slam the door on our face, but Leo put his foot between the gap and stopped him.
We know what you've been doing. We have the proof.
A flicker of fear turned the man pale. He lunged for the door, but Leo was faster. He shoved his shoulder against it, the momentum sending them both stumbling into the dimly lit apartment. A struggle ensued, a tangle of limbs and adrenaline. I lunged for a heavy book lying on a nearby table and smacked the man on the head, almost giving him a concussion. He finally gave up. When the sirens of cop cars wailed in the distance, a wave of exhaustion washed over me. We found out that the man's name was Arthur. He had a perfect life, a wife, and a young son. His wife got addicted to social media and neglected their young son. One day, the little boy, captivated by a flashing light, had wandered into the house's main circuit box and met a tragic end. The grief drove his wife to madness, and she left the house in the middle of the night. Arthur hasn't seen her since. Arthur, lost and broken, developed a twisted vendetta against the very technology that had stolen his family. He began stealing phones, immersing himself in the digital lives of his victims, hoping to terrify them into disconnecting, into cherishing the real world instead of the curated one on the screens. After the cops took Arthur away, I retrieved my phone, but the echo of, "Your phone knows everything," hung heavy in the air. I used to work for DoorDash a few years back. This incident happened during my last food delivery. I was riding my scooter into another Saturday night of dodging puddles and shady characters, all for a few extra bucks. If surviving in this world was tough, it was tougher in NYC. I stopped by the restaurant, which was an old Chinese takeout place I never came across before. A short, bald man came out from the kitchen holding a parcel. The place reeked of rotten meat, and I seriously questioned their hygiene and food quality. Handing me over the parcel, the man said it was to be delivered to an address named the Myers house. The old man looked at me with a blank stare and said,
Deliver it promptly before midnight. Do not knock. Leave it on the doorstep.
"So should I make a call or something to let the customer know that I've..."
You wouldn't want to disturb Mrs. Myers. Trust me, it's for your own good.
The man returned to the kitchen, and I couldn't help but think how weird everything was about this delivery. The GPS led me down an abandoned road. Soon, a dark shape materialized from the murk. A dilapidated house with its windows boarded up, staring back like lifeless eyes. Despite the thick, humid air, I felt a shiver run down my spine. I rechecked the address. It matched. A faint light illuminated the dark porch. There was no doorbell. I hesitated for a moment, then knocked on the heavy oak door. The sound cut through the thick silence, but there was no reply. I tried a few more times, growing more frustrated. Just as I was about to give up, the door creaked open. An old woman's partial face appeared in the crack. Her blue eyes glowed in the dark. In a raspy voice, she whispered,
Didn't he tell you not to knock?
"He did, but it's so dark out here, I didn't want to leave your food unattended."
Seems like you're different than the others.
I handed her the package, and her bony fingers brushed on my hands while taking it. Her touch was cold and creepy. Just then, a loud thunder cracked outside and heavy rain started. I murmured to myself in a low voice, "Damn it, now I have to drive back in this weather."
Well, you can wait here. Maybe have a glass of wine till the rain slows down.
A glass of wine wouldn't hurt, so I stepped in. The inside was a complete turnaround from the creepy exterior. A roaring fire crackled warmly in a grand stone hearth, casting a cozy glow over a luxurious living room. Eleanor introduced herself with an apology and asked me to have dinner with her. While I ate, Eleanor talked about the weather and the town. Her eyes, the only part of her face lit up by the fire, glowed with an unsettlingly bright amber. An eerie sensation started to crawl up my spine. After finishing the last bite, a strange emptiness settled in my stomach. "Thank you," I said, pushing the plate away. "That was deliciously different. I had no idea this restaurant serve was this good." Eleanor chuckled, letting out her crooked teeth, and said,
Yeah, People often judge by the physical appearance. Anyways, it's time for dessert.
I ran my hand over my full stomach and told her I didn't have a place left for dessert. And that's when her face changed. She grinned and picked up a sharp steak knife, saying,
The dessert is for me, dear. I'm happy the restaurant sent a white guy after such a long time. And I'm even happier that you knocked on the door.
A sudden wave of dizziness hit me. My head spun and the warmth from the fire turned into an overwhelming heat. Panic surged up my throat. I tried to stand, but my legs felt like lead. Eleanor moved towards me with an unsettling hunger and a cruel smile. She was no longer frail.
I'll enjoy you slowly. I promise.
This wasn't just a bad takeout. This was something far more sinister. With a jolt of adrenaline, I grabbed a heavy brass candlestick from a nearby table. As Eleanor lunged, I swung the candlestick, hitting her with a sickening crack. When she collapsed to the floor, a low, inhuman growl escaped her lips. She still tried to reach out to me. Taking advantage of the momentary reprieve, I stumbled towards the door, vision blurring. My hands fumbled for the handle, finally finding purchase. I slammed the door open and dashed into the rain, lungs screaming for air. I didn't look back. I didn't stop until the ragged outline of civilization reappeared, shimmering like a mirage in the distance. I saw a car coming, and with all my strength, I waved my arms, and then fainted on the muddy road. Later at the hospital, the doctors were baffled by my incoherent ramblings about an old woman who tried to eat me. They told me they found roofies in my stomach, and I think it came from the wine because Eleanor and I ate the same food. What's even more surprising is that the restaurant from where I picked up Eleanor's order vanished from the face of the earth. It was nowhere in the GPS. I'm certain that underground restaurants are scattered through NYC that are secretly filling these cannibals' midnight cravings. I still remember the sting which I felt when our teacher announced that Jill had passed away. It's been 5 years since. She was there one day, her bright smile lighting up the classroom, and then she was just gone. The official report said it was an accident, but something in me always felt it wasn't that simple. A few days after her passing, my friend Claire and I were wandering through the park near Jill's old house. That's when we found it, a phone, half buried in the dirt beneath a large oak tree. The screen was cracked, but it was powered on, and it shook us.
The wallpaper. Isn't that Jill's dog?
I think this is Jill's phone. We sat on a bench and went through it. We found videos that were dated the night Jill died. My hands trembled as I pressed play. The first video was shaky, showing Jill in her room. She looked scared, whispering frantically.
If anyone finds this, please help me. My dad, he's angry again.
The next video showed something more disturbing. Jill's father, Mr. Hart, stormed into her room, shouting incoherently. He grabbed her arm and she struggled, pleading with him to stop. The look in his eyes was terrifying, pure rage.
We have to show this to someone.
The final video ended abruptly, Jill screaming as the phone hit the ground. My heart raced, a mix of fear and anger bubbling up inside me. Foolishly, we decided to confront Mr. Hart, hoping to get answers. We reached her house. The place seemed more like a haunted mansion than a home. I knocked on the door and Mr. Hart answered, his eyes cold and calculating. Ah, Bill and... it's Claire, isn't it? Donna's daughter?
Yes, Mr. Hart. We, wanted to pay our condolences.
He just nodded his head. We also found something. I think it's Jill's phone. His face twisted in anger. He lunged at me, snatching the phone from my hand. We know what you did. I have backups of the things that were in her phone. He grew pale. You have a day to come out with the truth. Tomorrow, we go to the police. You kids have no idea what you're meddling with. Get out before you regret it. Claire and I ran, fear pushing us forward. We knew we needed to be cautious, so we shared our live location with each other, just in case. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying the videos, Jill's terrified face haunting me. The next day, I was walking home from school when a van pulled up beside me. Before I could react, Mr. Hart jumped out, grabbed me, and shoved me inside. He put a cloth over my face, and then I blacked out. When I opened my eyes, I was tied in the middle of a dense forest.
You should have stayed out of this, boy.
He tied me to a tree, pulling out a knife. I struggled, but the ropes were too tight.
You don't have to do this.
It's the only way. The curse, it needs blood. The shaman said it would lift if I sacrificed the blood of a virgin. But as it turns out, Jill was probably impure. You've always been a shy kid. I bet your blood would lift me from this financial depression.
What? Have you gone mad?
There are wolves in the world, and you gotta protect yourself.
You killed your own daughter because some shaman said so?
Don't speak ill of him. He speaks to the wolves.
Don't make this worse, Mr. Hart. Don't do this, please. But he moved ahead with his knife, uttering to himself.
Strike to the heart, 2 twists. The birdies will LARP, crush misfortunes and mists.
He approached closer while I begged and screamed at the top of my voice for help. But who would even know of my presence in the middle of nowhere? He touched the cold blade to my neck and just stared at it like a madman, looking at where to cut. I closed my eyes and yelled for one last time. But just as he raised the knife, bang, bang, 2 shots were fired. One hitting the tree close to my head and the other hitting him in the leg. He went down instantly, and to my relief, I saw policemen emerge from the woods with urgency, followed by Claire and her and my parents. I broke down immediately and cried, while the police rushed to untie me and arrest Mr. Hart. This was our plan all along, bait Mr. Hart. I became the victim. Claire had seen my location stop moving and called her parents, who alerted the authorities. He was taken away. Later, during interrogation, he confessed everything. He believed his family was cursed, unable to achieve financial freedom. A shaman convinced him that a blood sacrifice of a virgin was the only way to break the curse. He never liked Jill since she was a stepdaughter, and while her mother was away to Africa working as a missionary, he drowned her in the bathtub and faked it as an accident. We never know how many sick people are walking among us. 5 years on, I still think about that day sometimes, wishing peace unto Jill's spirit. The morning had started off like any other at the only KFC in our small Alabama town. I was behind the counter, wiping down the surfaces, getting ready for the usual rush. The smell of fried chicken filled the air, and the hum of the fryer was almost comforting. That was, until he walked in. The man was wearing shabby clothes covered in blood, carrying a dead hen by its neck, the lifeless bird swinging with his jerky steps. His eyes rolled around wildly, and he muttered some things to himself, words I couldn't quite catch. Then, his eyes locked onto mine. He walked up to the counter and slammed the chicken down with a sickening thud.
Need this chicken in my burgers. 6 burgers. And need this chicken only. This is my chicken.
I felt a chill run down my spine. I tried to keep my voice steady, tried to reason with him.
Sir, we can't use that chicken. We have our own.
His eyes snapped to mine, wild and furious, and I saw something dark and dangerous there. My heart raced.
Okay, sir. I'll take care of it.
I carefully took the dead hen and, trying to keep my composure, walked to the back and threw it in the dumpster. My friend Melissa packed 6 chicken burgers and handed them to me. He sat alone by the window, covered in blood, occasionally talking to himself. When he was leaving, he turned back to me.
She was Cynthia.
For days, I couldn't shake the image of him out of my mind. I jumped at every little sound, expecting to see him again. And then he came back one evening. Same disheveled appearance, same dead bird, blood on himself. This time, he ordered 5 burgers. We threw the dead bird out and gave Hai his burgers, which he ate alone while talking to himself. Before he left, he looked at me with those same wild eyes.
She was Rachel.
2 weeks passed and he showed up again, ordering 4 burgers this time. The pattern was unmistakable and it terrified me. He sat, eating slowly, and then left, saying,
She was Pauline.
Curiosity and fear gnawed at me. I needed to know more about this man. So as soon as he left, I decided to follow him, asking Melissa to cover for me. I trailed behind at a safe distance, my heart pounding. He walked with the same jerky motion, talking to himself. He led me to an old church, where he spoke something to the guard who laughed heartedly with him and patting his back. I decided to approach the guard.
Excuse me. Do you know that man?
The guard, an older gentleman, looked amused at my interest in the man.
Oh, that's crazy Christopher. Mentally ill, poor soul. But his father left him a ranch and all. He used to be an affluent farmer, you know. But after his wife passed away in a tragedy, he became, well, cuckoo.
Oh my God. If you don't mind me asking, what happened to her?
No one knows exactly. Christopher was away and their daughters were at their grandmother's. His wife was alone in the hen pen when she suffered an attack or a stroke or something. Poor man. When he returned, he found his hen feeding off of his dead wife. Something broke in his head that day.
A cold dread settled in my stomach.
He has daughters?
Oh yeah, 6 of them. Pauline, then there's Rebecca, and, Cynthia. She's a regular at this church, but I haven't seen her in a while.
Blood drained from my face. I dialed 911 and prayed that what I was thinking was wrong. The police took him in for inquiry from the church and then stormed into the ranch later that day. What they found sent a wave of terror and grief across our small town. They found his 3 alive daughters tied up inside a barn, chained and malnourished. It took the officers 3 days to find and recover the remains of Cynthia, Rachel, and Pauline buried on the farm. They were his 3 eldest daughters. It was later revealed in the news that Christopher was seeing visions of his wife talking to him, increasingly convincing him that they all had to suffer the same fate as hers, to be together in the afterlife. After killing each daughter one by one, he fed them to a starving hen, and then killed the bird, before carrying it to the KFC where I worked, asking for it to be made into burgers. No one had answers to why he wanted to eat those chickens only, but all his talking to himself made sense. He was probably seeing his dead wife. The whole episode made me sick, and I swore off chicken or any kind of meat after it all happened. It's been a decade since that night, but I remember every detail as if it happened yesterday. Laura seemed perfect when my parents first hired her to be the babysitter. She was friendly, well-educated, and the way she integrated into our household made it feel like she had always been a part of our lives. My little sister Lucy adored her, and even I, at 10 years old, thought she was the best babysitter we'd ever had. But as time went on, I started noticing things that didn't sit right. I walked in on her once and saw Laura collecting hair from my parents' shower drain. She explained that it was for a craft project, but it always felt off. Her extensive knowledge of poisons was another red flag. She would casually mention how certain plants could kill a person in minutes, passing it off as a quirky hobby. I started getting a bad feeling about her, but she was good at pretending around my parents. The night it all went wrong, Laura had put Lucy and me to bed and was in the kitchen preparing dinner. Our dog Max never liked her, and that night he was particularly irksome to her. I was jolted awake by his frantic squeals. Instinctively, I grabbed my sling and crept downstairs. What I saw in the backyard froze my blood. Laura was drowning Max in the pool. Without thinking, I loaded a small rock into my sling and shot at her. It hit her in the head, and she turned to look at me with pure hatred in her eyes.
You little shit. You are a dead boy.
She dropped Max, who slipped away whimpering, and she came after me. I bolted inside and she grabbed a kitchen knife as she started chasing me. I bolted, my heart pounding in my ears. The house was dark, and I stumbled through the rooms, desperately trying to stay ahead of her. She held onto my legs just as I had started running up the stairs, but I kicked at her face, making her slip. Ah! She screamed in fury and swung her knife, barely missing me. I managed to make it to my room, slamming the door shut behind me. I hugged my little sister, who grew scared as Laura pounded on the door, screaming,
"I'll kill you both! Just like I took care of the Hemingway kid! Make it look accidental!"
Lucy huddled in the corner, her eyes wide with fear. We didn't have a phone in our room, and I knew I had to come up with something fast. Then, I saw my toy drone on the shelf, and an idea sparked. "Lucy, give me that crayon and paper." I scribbled a desperate message, "Help, babysitter trying to kill us." I taped the note to my toy drone and flew it out the window, hoping it would reach Mr. Wilson's house next door. I guided the drone through his kitchen window, crashing it on his table. We could hear Laura stabbing at the door, the wood splintering under the force. But a few minutes later, all of us jolted at the sound of the doorbell. Laura went silent. Moments later, I heard Mr. Wilson's voice downstairs, trying to engage with Laura.
You must be the babysitter for Frank's kids. Is everything all right? I thought I heard something.
I cracked the door open and peered down the stairs. Laura was standing at the door, hiding the knife behind her. Mr. Wilson stood at the door, looking concerned but ready to help. He must have sensed the urgency in my message.
Everything's fine. Just playing with the kids.
But Mr. Wilson wasn't buying it. He stepped inside, and as he did, Laura lunged at him. I watched in horror as she stabbed him repeatedly, his blood pooling on the floor and spraying everywhere. Just then, the police burst through the door, guns drawn. Laura turned to face them, but they were too quick. Bang, bang, bang. They took her down before she could reach them. I ran down the stairs, my heart still racing. The police officers were already calling for an ambulance, trying to save Mr. Wilson, but it was too late. He was already gone. The days that followed were a blur. The police took statements, and the news was filled with stories about Laura. It turned out she had a history of mental illness and a fascination with poisons and death. The Hemingway kid she mentioned was real, another family who had lost a child under suspicious circumstances while Laura was their babysitter. My parents were devastated. They couldn't believe that they had let someone so dangerous into our home. It's been 10 years, but the memories of that night is as vivid as ever. I don't think I'll ever forget Laura. Moving into a new house is always a bit unsettling, but our new place was next to an abandoned Dunkin Donuts which had burned down almost a decade ago, which was infamous for being haunted, adding an extra layer of eeriness. My wife Lisa and I had just settled into our routine when suddenly, one morning, I found a box of donuts placed before my door. It had no label nor any mention of the sender. I found it weird. Lisa had a watery mouth when I brought it in, but I have a strict policy of not accepting food from strangers, so I threw it in the bin, despite her protest. Then, it became a ritual. Every morning, a fresh box of a dozen donuts would be sitting on our doorstep. At first, I thought it was a friendly gesture from the neighbors, but when I brought it up, they simply had no idea. I kept throwing the boxes away, but the donuts kept arriving. Growing frustrated, I even installed a camera to catch the culprit, but the footage showed nothing. One moment the porch was empty, the next, a box of donuts appeared as if by magic. "Lisa, we need to find out who's doing this. It's starting to get weird." Lisa just laughed. She loved donuts, and to her, it seemed like a harmless mystery.
Maybe whoever is being benevolent will stop once we actually eat it.
No food from strangers. These pranksters will mix in laxatives to get reaction pranks on YouTube. I don't trust them. But then, one morning as I entered the kitchen, I caught her sneaking a donut from the box. She smiled, powdered sugar on her lips.
Relax, John. They're just donuts.
That was the night things took a turn for the worse. I woke up to the sound of knocking on the windows. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but the knocking was rhythmic. 3 knocks, a pause, then 2 knocks. I got up to check, but found nothing. As I lay back down, I heard footsteps in the hallway, followed by a soft, eerie bell sound. It sounded like those bells you see at a hotel reception. "Lisa, did you hear that?" She mumbled in her sleep, turning away from me. I felt a chill run down my spine. Over the next few days, the disturbances became more frequent. The knocking, the footsteps, the bell. It was like we were living in a nightmare. Lisa started acting strange. She was distant, often staring blankly at the wall. One night, I found her in the kitchen, standing perfectly still, clutching a knife. "Lisa, what are you doing?" And out of nowhere, the same bell sound came. Suddenly, she turned to me, her eyes vacant, then suddenly lunged. I barely managed to avoid the blade, stumbling backwards. After then, she ran at me like a madness had taken over her. She chased me through the house, her movements jerky and unnatural, stopping, growling to herself, and then chasing again. But as soon as I reached the front door and threw it open, she stopped abruptly, her neck twisted, and just looking at the abandoned Dunkin Donuts restaurant. "Lisa, what's happening to you?" She didn't respond. Instead, she began walking slowly towards the burnt-out building. I followed her, keeping a safe distance. By this time, some people from the neighborhood started coming out of their houses. An old man approached me.
I don't know if you know this, son, but something is wrong with that place. It burned down 10 years ago, killed 6 men.
Lisa continued her slow march to the building, oblivious to everything around her. She reached the entrance, which was nothing more than a charred frame, and walked inside, stepping over the rubble, heading straight for the old counter. I ran after her, yelling out her name. She stopped, bent down, and picked something up from the debris. "Lisa, please!" She emerged with a small, tarnished bell, the kind you find at a hotel lobby. She placed it on the old counter, kept looking at it like stuck in a delusion, and then ring. Ring, ring. I felt a deep, cold fear grip my heart. I called 911. By the time help arrived, Lisa was still standing there, ringing the bell, her face a blank mask. They had to sedate her to get her to the hospital. Lisa was later admitted to a mental health facility. It's been 2 years now, and she hasn't opened her eyes since. I wish she hadn't eaten those donuts that day. I don't know how, but somehow, that is what led to everything. I had just finished a long day of work and decided to order food from my favorite sushi place. I was still adjusting to life without Brock, my fiancé, who passed away under mysterious circumstances 6 months ago. He was stuck deep into ritualistic practices ever since he lost his mom and seeked a way to contact her spirit. His absence left a void in my life that nothing could fill. When the delivery guy arrived that night, he held onto the bag for a moment longer than usual, staring at me with an unsettling intensity. His eyes were dark and piercing, and his demeanor made my skin crawl. He handed me the bag and left without a word. As I closed the door, a note fell out from the bag. It read, "Brock is alive." My heart raced. Could it be true? I rushed outside, but the delivery guy had vanished into the night. I felt a mixture of hope and dread. I had to find out more. Over the next 13 days, I ordered the same meal from the same restaurant, hoping to see that delivery guy again. Each night, a different person showed up at my door, and each night I was left disappointed. On the 13th day, he finally arrived.
What did you mean when you said Brock is alive?
The delivery guy looked puzzled. "I'm sorry, I don't know what you're talking about. This is my first time delivering to you."
Is this a joke?
"Ma'am, I'm just here to deliver your food."
How do you know Brock?
"I don't know any Brock. Look, miss, I'm not looking for any trouble. The food is $12.50. I felt a wave of confusion. Was he lying? He left, and I opened the food parcel to find another note. "Brock can hear us. Please meet me under the bridge on Mount Boulevard tomorrow evening at 6. The next evening, I stood under the bridge, feeling the cold wind whip through my hair. I waited for an hour, but no one came. Disheartened, I returned home. But to my shock, my apartment looked like it had been hit by a hurricane. The wall art was gone, the TV missing, litter everywhere, and my bedroom drawers were ransacked. I was in a state of panic, and that is when I put two and two together. The delivery guy was a scamster. He probably looked up that I had lost my fiancé and planned the whole thing to get me out of the house and ransack it. I called 911, my hands trembling as I dialed. 2 cops arrived quickly. They sat with me, calmed me down, and started talking the details. They called another unit with the information who arrived and brought a news that shook us all. They found a van in the parking lot of my building containing all my stolen items. The thief hadn't left with the loot. Damn, we might still have the thief inside. Did you check all the rooms?
No, I was too distraught. I never looked into the guest bedroom.
The police barged into the guest room. I heard a gasp from one of the officers while the other rushed out urgently and started speaking something on his radio. I peeked in and saw the thief lying dead on the floor, covered in blood and surrounded by shards of glass. What happened here? I was horrified. The police looked at me with suspicion, but then they noticed the mirror in the corner. Written in blood were the words, "It was Brock." I was in shock. Was his spirit somehow involved in all this? That night, I fell into a restless sleep at my sister's house since my place was sealed. My mind swirling with fear and confusion, all the pain which I had finally started to avoid, surfacing. But in my dream, I saw Brock. He looked just like he did before he died, handsome with a gentle smile that always made me feel safe. He reached out to me, but before I could touch him, he vanished. When I woke up, I felt a strange sense of peace, as if Brock had given me a message. I got out of the bed and went to the bathroom, where I saw a faint reflection of Brock in the mirror, smiling at me. Tears streamed down my face as I whispered to his reflection.
I miss you so much, Brock.
His reflection slowly faded, but the warmth in my heart remained. I knew that Brock was somehow still with me, protecting me. I didn't understand the supernatural events that had unfolded, but I felt a deep connection to Brock's spirit. I've been the manager of Harrow Apartments for over a decade. The building, with its tarnished reputation, is known among delivery drivers as a place where strange things often happen in the elevator. Some call it haunted, others say it's cursed. Whatever it is, it's my job to keep things running smoothly, or at least as smoothly as they can in a place like this. The rumors started years ago, but the incidents that cemented Harrow's infamy was hard to dismiss. The first one was the most shocking. A young delivery guy, maybe in his early 20s, entered the elevator with a bag of food. The CCTV footage showed him looking around nervously as soon as the doors closed. He seemed to hear something. Then his eyes widened in horror. Without warning, he burst into flames. Spontaneous combustion, they call it. One moment he was there, the next, gone in a blaze. How does someone just burst into flames? The second incident wasn't any easier to explain. Another delivery person, an older man this time, entered the elevator. The footage showed him clutching his chest as soon as the door shut. He stumbled, gasping for air, and collapsed. A stroke, the doctor said, but the timing was uncanny. Then there was a third, a woman delivering groceries. She entered the elevator, and as soon as the doors closed, she started screaming, her eyes fixed on something invisible in the corner. She banged on the doors, begging to be let out, then fell to the floor, dead from a heart attack. These incidents never happened to residents, only to delivery people. And not every delivery person, just some. And then came Bruce. Bruce was young and carefree, an extrovert. He'd give me a high five whenever he'd be delivering to one of the residents. We had spoken about the infamy of the elevators before, but Bruce was one of those who didn't believe in the stories. Young and brash, he dismissed the warnings as superstitions. It's just an old building. Nothing's gonna happen to me. Unless the elevator wires snap. Then you'd go to jail, buddy. That day, he entered the elevator with a bag of takeout. I wasn't at the reception, but saw these later through the CCTV recordings. He pressed the button for the 10th floor, but the elevator stopped after a few seconds of going up. Confused, he pressed more buttons rapidly, but nothing happened. The CCTV footage showed him standing there, perplexed, when he suddenly went limp, but remained standing, kinda like sleeping while being up. What I saw next, I don't believe in all the spirits and shit, but I saw him suddenly levitate in the air for a few seconds before collapsing. Bruce woke up and frantically pressed the buttons again. His eyes widened in terror as he turned towards a corner of the elevator. He started screaming and banging on the doors, his face twisted in fear. And then, for a fraction of a second, the footage showed a shadowy, almost invisible figure in the corner. Bruce saw it too and froze. Then the camera glitched, and the screen went black. When the footage resumed, Bruce was gone. He had entered the elevator, but never left it. He vanished without a trace. What is happening in that elevator? Oh, the legend goes back to the building's construction during the Great Depression. Work halted at the 21st floor when funds dried up. The construction workers, suddenly jobless, faced hunger and despair. One worker, in his desperation, jumped from the 21st floor into the elevator shaft. His body was never found, and when the construction resumed 2 years later, no one bothered to check for a body at the bottom of the rubble in the shaft. I've come to believe that the workers' spirits haunt the elevator. Maybe it's revenge, or maybe it's something more sinister. The spirit seems to target only those who are carrying food, perhaps a cruel reminder of his own hunger and despair. I've tried to get the elevator inspected, but every time the technicians come, they find nothing wrong. It's as if whatever haunts the elevator knows when it's being watched. The residents have their theories. Some say the worker's spirit is trapped, reliving his last moments over and over. Others think it's a curse that anyone who enters the elevator with food is doomed. I don't know what to believe, but I do know this. The elevator isn't safe. I've thought about quitting, but something keeps me here. Maybe it's the hope that I'll find a way to end the curse, to put the spirit to rest. Or maybe it's the fear that if I leave, I'll never know what really happened. Taking a job at the local KFC seemed like a good idea. I was 24, fresh out of college and looking for something to pay the bills while I figured out my next steps. The KFC was well known for its high turnover rate amongst employees, but it didn't bother me. I figured fast food jobs were always like that. Besides, the rumors of the kitchen being haunted were just silly superstitions to me.
People always make up stories to explain why they quit. It's probably just the late hours and the hard work.
One night, after I closed the KFC and was leaving for home, I spotted a woman sitting by the window, holding an orange umbrella. My heart skipped a beat. I thought I had locked a customer in by mistake. I quickly unlocked the door and rushed inside, but to my shock, there was no one there. The next night, I started my shift with a sense of unease. Everything seemed normal until odd things began happening. Pots and pans would fall on their own, making loud clattering noises that echoed through the empty kitchen. The fryer would turn on by itself, the oil bubbling and hissing without anyone even touching it. Cold spots followed me around, making my hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. One time, the walk-in freezer door swung open with a creak, even though I knew I had shut it tight. And then, as I went to shut it, the soda machine started dispensing drinks on its own, spilling liquid all over the counter. I tried to ignore the strange occurrences, focusing on my tasks. But that night, after closing up, I saw her again. The woman with the orange umbrella was sitting by the window, only this time, she was staring directly at me. Panic surged through me, and I rushed to my car, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. Before I drove away, I saw in the rearview mirror, but the woman was gone again. The next day, I confided it all in my colleague, Mike. He was an older guy and had been working at the outlet for 3 years.
Mike, I keep seeing this woman with an orange umbrella. She just sits by the window staring at me. It's freaking me out.
Hey, congratulations! Mrs. Margaret has chosen to present herself to you as well.
Mrs. Who?
Look, you were always poking about why people leave this place so quickly, right? Well, you found the reason. He pulled out an old news article on his phone from 4 decades ago. It showed a picture of a beautiful woman with a big smile. The headline read, "Local businesswoman disappears on opening day of husband's restaurant."
Who is she?
Look at her hands. I did. To my shock, the woman was holding an orange umbrella. This place was built 4 decades ago. On the very day of the inauguration, the owner's wife, Margaret, disappeared. No one knows what happened to her. People say her spirit haunts this place, but she's harmless. Just ignore her if you see her. That night, as I locked up the outlet, I saw her again. I could see that her eyes were locked onto mine, but there was something about her that pulled me in. This time, as I unlocked the door and entered inside, she didn't disappear. She kept sitting there, still looking at me.
Mrs. Margaret?
As soon as I said her name, she got up slowly, and then without warning started floating towards the back of the outlet. My heart pounded in my chest as I followed her.
Mrs. Margaret?
She didn't respond, just kept moving silently. She led me to an old defunct storage room and then vanished behind a wall. The next day, I told Mike and the other colleagues what I saw. We all decided to investigate. She hasn't done this before. If she's leading you somewhere, there's gotta be a good reason. We entered the room and I pointed exactly where the woman had disappeared. It was unanimously decided to tear down the wall. Mike and Jim brought out hammers from Jim's brother's truck, and before the opening hours, they started tearing down the wall. Soon enough, we found a small, hidden cavity behind it. One by one, we carefully entered inside. It was covered in dust and cobwebs and a terrible smell, but what I saw next made me scream at the top of my voice. In a corner, there was a skeleton, still wrapped in clothing from decades ago, and near its hand lay a dusty old orange umbrella, as if lost in time forever. Mrs. Margaret, apparently murdered by her husband and cleverly hidden away from the world for an eternity. Why? We'd never get to know, but since that day, Mrs. Margaret's ghost was never seen again. Taking the babysitter job for the Wilsons seemed like a straightforward way to earn some extra cash. Their Victorian house, with its creaky floors and old-world charm, felt like stepping into a different era. I was a college student, struggling with bills, and this seemed like the perfect opportunity. Miss Wilson was kind enough to show me around the house, pointing out all the essential things. She mentioned their son Timmy's unusual habit of talking to an old toy phone every night, which she chalked up to his imaginative mind. When Mrs. Wilson left, Timmy and I spent the evening playing games and watching TV. He was an easy kid to get along with, and by 9 p.m. I tucked him into bed. That's when things started to get strange. I heard Timmy's voice through the crack of his bedroom door. Curious, I crept closer and listened.
Yes, Mr. Midnight, I promise I'll be good. I won't tell her.
His voice was serious, far too serious for a child talking to a toy phone. My skin prickled with unease.
No, Mr. Midnight, she's nice. Don't hurt her.
My heart skipped a beat. Who is he talking to? I pushed the door open gently and walked in.
Hey, Timmy. Who are you talking to?
He looked up at me, his eyes wide with fear.
Mr. Midnight doesn't like eavesdroppers, Sarah. You shouldn't listen.
I picked up the toy phone, but there was nothing, just plastic silence.
Hello, Mrs. Midnight. Please tell Timmy to be a good boy and go to sleep.
I joked and left, but Timmy's warning stayed with me. That night, after he'd fallen asleep, the house phone rang. I picked it up, but there was only static and faint whispers. It felt like someone was there, just beyond the static.
Hello? Who is this?
No answer, just static. I hung up, feeling a growing sense of unease, but then the calls started coming every few minutes. Every time I answered, there were whispers and static. Frustrated, I unplugged it finally, picked up a book, and sat in the living room. Suddenly, I heard footsteps upstairs. I went to check on Timmy, but he was fast asleep. It didn't make any sense. Then I heard someone moving down the hall, closer and closer. I followed the footsteps into the kitchen when I saw a shadowy figure dart out of the corner of my eye. I turned quickly in shock, but there was nothing there. I shook it off, blaming my imagination, but the sense of being watched never left. So I sat down to watch the TV, trying to take my mind off it. But very soon it flickered, and the temperature in the room dropped suddenly. That is when I saw a shadow moving across the wall, stopping at the doorway. My breath caught in my throat as I realized it wasn't a trick of the light. The shadow seemed to pulse, like it was alive, and then it slowly disappeared.
This isn't real. It can't be real.
My heart pounded as I tried to rationalize what I had seen, and that is when the phone rang again. Impossible. I had clearly unplugged it. My hands trembled as I walked over and picked up the receiver, hearing the familiar static and whispers.
Who is this? What do you want?
This time, a voice broke through the static, barely audible but unmistakably menacing.
Run.
I dropped the phone, my heart racing. I rushed up to Timmy's room, grabbed him, and headed for the door. But a dark figure blocked our way. It was tall and menacing, its presence suffocating.
Stay behind me, Timmy.
I grabbed a nearby lamp and threw it at the figure, but it went right through. The figure laughed, a low guttural sound that sent chills down my spine. Desperate, I saw the toy phone in Timmy's hand, and I don't know what got into me. I grabbed it and smashed it against the floor. The figure screamed and then just vanished, the house finally falling silent. When the Wilsons returned, they found Timmy and me shaken but safe. Mr. Wilson told that the previous owners of the place were murdered by a psychopath many years ago, a serial killer who left toy phones as his marker. He immediately called the facility where the serial killer was being held and learned that he died on the night of the Thanksgiving about a month ago. Mrs. Wilson suddenly walked in, holding the toy phone in her hand.
I thought you said you destroyed Timmy's phone. I did. Where did you find it? It was in his room.
That is when Timmy started waving at something which we couldn't see. Mr. Wilson grabbed us all and we ran out of the house. He called 911, but I didn't wait to see and ran for my home. My friends and I were obsessed with the occult back in school. We spent countless nights hunched over dusty books of satanic cults we could get our hands on the web, seeking the thrill. It was Jimmy who discovered the bizarre fact about the founder of Pringles, whose ashes were buried in a Pringles can. To us kids trying to avoid homework sounded like the perfect setup for a seance. One Friday night, we gathered in Jimmy's basement when his parents were out. The place was dimly lit by flickering candles, the air thick with the scent of incense. An old Ouija board lay on the floor between us, next to a can of Pringles. The ritual was Jimmy's idea. He claimed he found it in an ancient grimoire online. We each took turns eating a Pringle, then placed the can in the center of our circle. We joined hands, the atmosphere electric with anticipation. Spirits of the beyond, we summon thee. We seek the spirit of Frederick Bauer, creator of Pringles. Reveal yourself to us. His voice echoed through the basement. For a moment, nothing happened. We had tried these online rituals before, and they were usually a hogwash. But just as I was about to laugh it off, a chill ran down my spine. The candle flames flickered violently, casting twisted shadows on the wall. Frederick Bauer, show yourself! The Ouija board's planchette began to move, spelling out words we couldn't understand. The temperature suddenly dropped, and a low, guttural growl filled the room. Suddenly, the Pringles can toppled over, rolling towards me as if pushed by an unseen hand. Guys, this doesn't feel right. Before I could finish, the lights went out. The basement was plunged into darkness, the only sound our panicked breathing. Then, the haunting began. The first instance was subtle. We heard whispers, incomprehensible and eerie, echoing through the basement. At first, we thought it was just our imaginations, but when the whispers turned into wailing of a woman, we knew something was horribly wrong.
We need to end this now!
He tried to close the seance, but the Ouija board wouldn't cooperate. The planchette moved on its own, spelling out no over and over. Suddenly, Jimmy was thrown across the room, his body slamming into the wall with a sickening thud. He groaned, struggling to stand. As we ran for the door, the basement door slammed shut. An invisible force yanked at my hair, pulling me all the way down the stairs back into the basement. I screamed, clawing at the air, but there was nothing to fight against. Jimmy and Sarah grabbed me, pulling me back, but the force was relentless. My scalp burned as clumps of hair were ripped out. Suddenly, Sarah's arm was twisted at an unnatural angle, bones cracking under the pressure of an unseen grip. She cried out in pain, tears streaming down her face. We watched in horror as dark bruises formed on her skin. "We need to get out of here!" We scrambled towards the basement door again, but it wouldn't budge. The candles reignited on their own, their flames turning blue. Slowly, we saw 4 to 5 shadows walking across and slowly merging into a dark, humanoid figure, its eyes glowing white. It lunged at us, passing through Jimmy's body. He convulsed, his eyes rolling back as the spirit seemed to possess him. "You cannot escape." His voice was a horrible blend of his and the spirit's, deep and distorted. He grabbed Sarah by the throat, lifting her off the ground. I tackled him, breaking his grip, but the spirit was still inside him, fighting back with inhuman strength. In the chaos, Sarah found a discarded crucifix among the occult items. She held it up, chanting a prayer through sobs. Strangely, it worked. The spirit recoiled, and Jimmy collapsed, the dark figure coming out and dissipating into the air. The 3 of us rushed to the door again, and this time it opened. We managed to drag Jimmy to his dad's car, tying him to the seat with the seatbelt. Something told us that it wasn't safe to be in the house. Jimmy was still thrashing and screaming, the spirit's influence still lingering, but he finally calmed down after some time. Exhausted and terrified, we slumped in the car. None of us even knew how to drive, and we didn't think any neighbors would believe us, so we just kept to ourselves. The 3 of us got some sleep till Jimmy's dad knocked on the window to wake us up early next morning. We got out and dropped some excuse, but Sarah glanced at the back seat and froze. The can of Pringles from our ceremony was lying there. I checked into the small motel in Kansas, exhausted from my work trip. The neon sign outside flickered, casting an eerie glow over the parking lot. Room 23 was nothing special. A bed, a nightstand, a worn-out chair, and a Bible in the drawer. I tossed my bag on the bed and headed to the bathroom to splash some water on my face. That's when I saw it, a mobile phone lying on the sink. It looked like it had been there for a while, a bit dusty but otherwise in good condition. I couldn't resist my curiosity and plugged it into my charger while I took a dump. When I picked it up again, the screen lit up, and to my surprise, it was unlocked. This is weird. Who leaves their phone behind like this? I started flipping through the photos straight away. A beautiful girl with long dark hair appeared in every picture, always wearing a golden cross necklace. She was smiling in most of them, but something seemed off. The backgrounds were often blurred, and there was a strange shadowy figure in the corners of some images. It was getting weird, but it jumped to unsettling in the last picture, in which she held her tongue out and was almost licking a dead cat, which she held in her hands. There was a strange symbol drawn with blood on the wall behind her, probably a satanic ritual. That is when suddenly, a woman's scream pierced the silence, making me jump. The phone screen glitched as well. My heart pounded as I looked around, but there was no one else there. What the hell was that? I shook off the unease and turned to the phone, but it wouldn't start. And automatically, the bathtub tap turned on. But as I approached to close it, I felt like I saw a shadow move in the corner. I didn't think much of it, splashed some water on my face and returned to the room. About an hour later, I was tucked into bed, had my laptop on, and was working on a presentation when I looked up and what I saw made my heart skip a few beats. There, in the middle of the small motel room, I saw a shadow standing and watching me. I froze, couldn't even scream, but the shadow just turned and started walking towards the bathroom. I don't know why, but I followed, heart in my throat, and after it disappeared behind the door, I pushed it open. But nothing. The bathroom was empty. Okay, what did they mix in the water? I decided to take a break and pulled out the Bible from the drawer. Maybe a passage would help calm my nerves. I opened it at random and found a highlighted passage, which was strange. "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid?" As soon as I read, the room began to tremble. A woman's scream echoed in the room. I dropped the Bible and ran to the bathroom, knowing the source of the screams was there. This time, the sight made my blood run cold. The same girl from the phone was levitating above the bathtub, her face twisted. The golden cross was around her neck, glowing ominously. Blood poured from her mouth as she screamed, filling the tub below. I stood frozen, unable to move or look away. She plunged into the blood-filled tub and everything went black. When I woke up, I was lying on the bathroom floor. Everything seemed normal, the bathroom clean, and the tub empty. I thought maybe it had all been a horrible nightmare, but then I saw it. The golden cross lying in the bathtub. No way this could be real. I reached for it, the cold metal against my skin. A sense of dread washed over me. I had to know more about what happened to this girl, so I hurried to the motel office. The motel manager was an older man. I showed him the cross and asked about the girl.
"That belonged to Maria. She stayed here a few months ago. Sweet girl, always smiling, but something changed. She seemed scared, like she was running from something. One night, she just vanished. No bags, no phone, no sign of her, but she painted some horrible things in the bathroom. I didn't want no trouble with the police, so I got it cleaned up."
I felt a shiver run down my spine. I packed my things and left that very night. But along the way, I stopped my car, dug a hole by the roadside, and buried the phone there. I thought it was a satanic ritual which went wrong, but I wished her peace and left. This is one of the most sensational and controversial conspiracy theories surrounding the assassination attempt on former President Donald Trump. Imagine this: Trump, aware that his popularity is slipping, his once ironclad grip on the electorate loosening, devises a plan so audacious, so unprecedented that it would either catapult him back to the top or seal his fate in the annals of political history. The theory goes that Trump himself orchestrated the assassination attempt as a calculated move to boost his popularity during a critical moment in the presidential race. It's a bold claim, but let's dive into the details, examining events at the rally and subsequent discoveries that led credence to this shocking notion. Picture the scene: a rally in Butler, Pennsylvania. The air is thick with anticipation, the crowd swelling, perhaps larger than expected given Trump's recent slump in the polls. And then, the unthinkable happens. A shot rings out, the crowd panics, and Trump miraculously survives. But was it a miracle, or was it all part of a carefully crafted plan? The timing of this incident is particularly off. Just weeks before, Trump's poll numbers were plummeting, his campaign struggling to regain traction. The idea of a staged assassination, designed to evoke sympathy, dominate media coverage, and reignite his base's fervor, starts to take shape. Let's talk about the rally itself. Despite Trump's declining popularity, the rally was unusually well attended. It's almost if something extraordinary was anticipated, something that would draw the crowds back in. Enter Thomas Matthew Crooks, the assassin. Crooks, a man with a questionable past, somehow manages to infiltrate a highly secured area, positioning himself for the perfect shot. Critics argue that such a feat would be nearly impossible without inside help, suggesting that the event was staged with a cooperation from either the Secret Services or from someone within Trump's own security team. And then there's the response, or rather the lack thereof. Witnesses at the rally reported a delayed and seemingly disorganized reaction from the Secret Service, almost as if the chaos was pre-arranged, designed to create maximum impact without actual harm coming to Trump. But it wasn't just the rally itself that raised eyebrows. The aftermath was even more telling. Almost immediately, media coverage took a sympathetic turn, portraying Trump as a resilient, targeted leader. It was as if the entire narrative had been created to boost his image, to transform him from a controversial figure into a martyr, and it worked. Within hours of the attempt, Trump's campaign saw a massive surge that seemed almost too convenient, too perfectly timed. It's as if the event had the desired effect of rallying his financial base, reinvigorating a campaign that had been struggling to stay afloat. It clearly worked since his biggest rival, the current president Joe Biden, dropped out of the presidential race. And then, as investigators began, more pieces of the puzzle started to fall into place. Thomas Matthew Crooks, the man behind the trigger, was revealed to have a history of mental health issues and financial troubles. It's not hard to imagine a scenario where he could have been manipulated, coerced, or even paid off to participate in a staged attack. And speaking of payments, financial records show unexplained transactions in Crooks' account in the months leading up to the attempt. These funds were traced back to shell companies linked to individuals with ties to Trump's campaign, suggesting a potential payoff for his role in the elaborate scheme. But it doesn't stop there. Analysts who dug deeper into Trump's campaign expenditures noticed irregularities, significant sums allocated to vague security enhancements, and crisis management services shortly before the rally. It's almost as if they were preparing for something big, something that would require immediate and extensive damage control. And while the idea of a self-orchestrated assassination may seem far-fetched, it's important to remember that the use of dramatic events to shift public opinion is not unprecedented in political history. Leaders throughout time have allegedly staged attacks or incidents to consolidate power, rally support, and maintain control over the narrative. In this context, Trump's involvement in such a scheme starts to make a twisted kind of sense. Known for his media savvy and his willingness to employ unconventional tactics, Trump's orchestrating of an assassination attempt on himself could be seen as a logical extension of his approach to maintaining relevance and control. By surviving the attempt, Trump could present himself as a martyr-like figure, enduring great personal risk for the sake of his political mission. This narrative would not only garner deep sympathy and loyalty among his supporters, but also allow him to reinforce the idea that he is constantly under attack by powerful adversaries, whether they are political opponents, the media, or even the so-called deep state. The psychological and socio-political implications of such an event are profound. The dramatic nature of an assassination attempt guarantees extensive media coverage, allowing Trump to dominate the news cycles and overshadow his political rivals. And by framing the opposition or other entities as responsible for the attack, Trump could strategically discredit them, rallying public support against perceived common enemies. The theory, while controversial, offers a captivating and believable explanation for the anomalies surrounding the assassination attempt. Whether you believe in it or not, it's undeniably a narrative that many agree to. The suspicions, timing, the security anomalies, the financial trails, all of these elements create a story that continues to intrigue and divide. As always, we encourage you to research, question, and critically evaluate the information to form your own conclusions. I'd been into the industry as a model for about 2 years and didn't really have many friends. I had few work friends, or the ones I would meet on shoots after months. Since I'm an introvert, I find it especially hard. So when Josephine invited me for a road trip with her modeling friends, I said yes. Josephine was one of the hottest things in the industry. Affairs with a late-night show host, hooking up with millionaires, posh brands. She had it all. Of course, I wanted to be friends with her. She picked me along with her friend Melanie and Claire, and we left for a road trip to Joshua Tree to escape the mundane and indulge in magic mushrooms. We only stopped once to fill gas. I bought a can of Pringles and some beer before we were on our way. After only about an hour of reaching Joshua Tree, we started tripping. Beyond the initial euphoria, the world around me suddenly morphed into a kaleidoscope of vibrant colors and shapes. Everything was magical. My hands were suddenly fluffier. Melanie's voice suddenly started sounding like that of a man, and Josephine's eyes went red, while she started swinging her body like a pendulum while standing. It was fun, until the munchies hit us like a freight train. Josephine rummaged through our supplies only to discover that our snacks were missing. We looked as well, but all that I could see were vibrant red skies and waves in the distance, which were getting bigger. Panic set in as we realized that the only thing left was a single can of Pringles in the car. It wasn't enough.
Josephine? Where did you put the snacks?
Josephine's eyes widened, her pupils dilated. She stared at me blankly, and I could see her grip on reality slipping.
I thought you had them, Adele.
A wave of annoyance surged through me. My voice took on an accusatory edge.
You were in charge of the snacks.
The tension in the air thickened. Melanie and Claire sat quietly, their eyes darting between Josephine and me, sensing the brewing storm. Josephine's face twisted in a mix of hallucinations and anger. The drugs had heightened all of our emotions, and I could see Josephine's mental stability teetering on the edge.
Don't blame this on me. Like you're always so perfect. Adele, so damn perfect. What are you even talking about? They're picking you for the Gucci campaign, bitch. Tony thinks I lost the X Factor. Can you imagine? Dropping me, a literal legend, for you. Bitch, you can't even model.
Before I could react, she suddenly lunged at me. She snatched the can of Pringles, her eyes wild, and started bashing it against my head. I fell to the ground, dazed.
Get off me, you lunatic!
The desert spun around me, my vision blurring. I could hear Melanie and Claire shouting, but their voices seemed distant, like echoes in a canyon. Josephine continued her assault, her hands clawing at my face. I felt her nails dig into my skin, ripping and tearing. Blood ran down my cheeks, mixing with my tears.
Stop! Josephine, please!
But she was lost in her own world, her actions fueled by a dangerous mix of drugs and latent rage. As I struggled, the world shifted. My hallucinations morphed Josephine's face into that of a Pringles mascot, a twisted caricature grinning down at me with malevolent glee.
No, this isn't real.
But the pain was real. The terror was real. I fought back, trying to push her off, but she was relentless. She grabbed a rock, raising it high above her head. I closed my eyes, bracing for the impact. In a surge of adrenaline, Melanie and Claire managed to pull her off me. I gasped for air, my body trembling. They dragged her to the car, shoving her inside. Josephine screamed and thrashed, but they managed to tie her to the seatbelt, securing her in place.
Adele? Are you okay?
I nodded weakly, my head throbbing, my vision still hazy. Blood dripped from the wounds on my face.
We need to wait until she calms down.
We sat in silence, the only sound Josephine's ragged breathing and the distant call of coyotes. Slowly, the effects of the drugs began to wear off. Josephine slumped in the seat.
The mushrooms must have triggered something in her. We need to get help.
The desert, which had seemed so enchanting hours before, now felt ominous and foreboding. I knew that I had to see a doctor soon, praying that Josephine's attack wouldn't leave scarring on my face. That is when my eyes fell on the seat next to Josephine. There, partially hidden under a blanket, was the bag of snacks we had been searching for. A tear escaped my eye as I got in the car and we left. This story is a work of fiction. This is one of the most chilling conspiracy theories surrounding the recent assassination attempt on former President Donald Trump. Imagine this, a shadowy network of government officials, intelligence operatives, and powerful elites, what some refer to as the deep state, plotting in the dark to eliminate Trump because of his anti-establishment stance. It's a theory that sends shivers down your spine, but when you start connecting the dots, the picture that emerges is nothing short of terrifying. The term deep state is often thrown around, but what does it really mean? According to this theory, the deep state is a clandestine network operating within the government and allied elites who wield power independently of elected officials. Their goal? To control policy, maintain their grip on power, and ensure that anyone who threatens their influence is neutralized. Trump, with his fiery populist rhetoric and disruptive policies, was seen as a direct threat to this entrenched power structure. From the moment he stepped into office, he declared war on the so-called swamp, a term he used to describe the corrupt officials and elites he believed were sabotaging America from within. Fast forward to the rally in Butler, Pennsylvania, where a man who was barely 20 years old took a shot at an ex-president of the United States. Things just don't add up. It was supposed to be just another campaign stop, but for those who believe in the deep state theory, it was anything but ordinary. Let's start with the sniper, Thomas Matthew Crooks, who managed to infiltrate a highly secured area. How could someone get that close to a former president without inside help? Critics argue that Crooks had access to information that only someone within Trump's security detail could have provided. And then there's the delay in the Secret Service's response, a delay that some witnesses described as confusion and disorganization. Could this have been sabotage? Could certain members of Trump's own security team have been compromised? Those have emerged where people claim to have spotted the shooter and alerted the authorities as much as 15 minutes before the shot was placed. Then why did it take so long for the authorities, cops, and snipers to interject? Suspicions don't end there. Surveillance footage from before the rally shows certain security personnel acting strangely. Some were seen leaving their posts, others engaging in what appeared to be covert communications. What were they talking about? Why were they abandoning their stations at such a crucial time? There were the reports of unexplained equipment being brought into the venue. Equipment that, some speculate, could have been used to aid the sniper or disrupt standard security protocols. It's almost as everything was set up to create the perfect opportunity for the attack. Following the assassination attempt, investigations began to unearth some disturbing findings. For one, Thomas Matthew Crooks wasn't just some lone gunman with a grudge, but a pawn in a larger scheme, perhaps. Investigators also found encrypted communications on Crooks' devices. These messages, which could indicate a level of coordination and planning that extended far beyond a simple lone wolf attack. This wasn't just some random act of violence. This was orchestrated, methodical, and deeply sinister. This wasn't the first time something like this had happened. This incident shed light on a disturbing pattern of previous, less publicized attempts on Trump's life and career, from hacking attempts to physical threats. It seemed like there was a sustained campaign to destabilize and eliminate him, a campaign that had been running almost since the day he announced his candidacy. So what could drive the deep state to such lengths? The answer lies in power and control. Trump's rhetoric and policies were a direct threat to the entrenched interests that have been quietly pulling the strings of American politics for decades. His promise to drain the swamp wasn't just a catchy slogan. It was a declaration of war against those who made the swamp their home. His aggressive stances on immigration, trade, and foreign relations disrupted long-standing agreements and practices that benefited the deep state. For them, allowing Trump to succeed was simply not an option. It would set a dangerous precedent, encouraging other populist leaders to rise up and challenge their authority. In their eyes, Trump's removal was not just necessary, it was essential to safeguard their dominance. Whether people believe in the deep state theory or not, the assassination attempt on Donald Trump has undoubtedly sparked intense debate and scrutiny. The anomalies at the rally, the connections uncovered during investigations, and the broader implications of a possible deep state involvement create a compelling narrative that continues to capture the public's imagination. As always, we encourage you to do your own research and form your own opinions on these complex and controversial topics.